Hey there, how are you? I hope you're. Okay, let's do that again. Oh, why is everything so hard? What do I do on my channel again? I'm here to talk to you about a pale view of hills. Why is this so hard? I don't know. All right, from the top again, y'all. Hey there, how are you? I hope you're doing good. I hope you have a warm or cool beverage based on what the weather is like where you are. As we dive into a new book that I just finished recently. You know how sometimes you start reading a book and then you're done with it and it just stays in your brain and refuses to leave? Well, this book that I just read was something like that. So I just read A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro. And just to give you a little premise, the book is about a woman called Etsuko. She's Japanese. She's now living in England, and she's dwelling on the recent suicide of her daughter, Keiko. So the novel switches between the past and the present. Etsuko's in this big house in England, and her younger daughter has just come to visit her, Nikki. And as Etsuko and Nikki are talking, some of the conversation triggers a summer that Etsuko lived in Nagasaki. And so the novel switches between the present where she's in England and the past where she's in Nagasaki. And that's sort of the story. And in Nagasaki, Etsuko befriends this sort of strange woman named Sachiko. And then we see just the story go forward from there. In the interest of people who haven't read the book, I want to keep parts of it spoiler free, like in the beginning, but really, if you want to delve into the story and just like understand its themes better, which is what I want to do, it's gonna have to be with spoilers. So I will link like timestamps in the video below so you know what parts to skip if you haven't read the book. But please, if you haven't read the book, read the book. It is Kazuo Ishiguro's debut novel, and it is crazy that he could write like this in his debut novel. Like, I read it and I was blown away. It's been sitting in my head rent free. And it's like after a certain point I just couldn't take it anymore, so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to make a video about it to talk about it so I can get it out of my system, so to speak. Kazuo Ishiguro is a Japanese author, but he moved to England when he was like young, maybe 5 years old. He has written a lot of other novels. He's won the Nobel Prize in Literature as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of A Pale View of Hills, but I did read it on my Kindle, so that was nice. And I have some of his other books in case you've heard of them. I have The Remains of the Day, and I have An Artist of the Floating World, another one of his popular books. And I think this one is probably pretty well known, Clara and the Sun. And in case you, as you've noticed, Faber and Faber has published them in like these nice rainbow-esque colors. I think A Pale View of Hills is in pink, but I could be wrong. Anyhow, so those are some of Ishiguro's novels. So let's just dive right in, should we? So I want to give you a small like review of mine, which is going to be spoiler free. And then I'll leave my rating and my full review at the end of the video that you can skip to that. So the themes in this book are really multi-layered. They're impactful, not just to the characters in the novel, but also Japan as a country, what it was going through, especially after the war. There's a lot of ghost-like qualities to the novel and the writing and some of the characters, which I think it's something that you find in a lot of Japanese media forms, especially after they've been through something really traumatic, like a war. Or I've also seen movies where it's like the tsunami has happened and a lot of people have died, and then people recall seeing like ghosts of their relatives and stuff. So there is that. There's a strange ethereal quality to Ishiguro's writing throughout this novel, which I'll delve more deeply into later. But overall, I felt like the book was deeply impactful. It spoke about things that I felt are so important, not just to Japan as a country, but just to human beings and the tragedies that we go through, whether it's as a nation or as a people or in our own personal lives. I just thought that the way that he approached the topic was really good and impactful, as you can tell, because I've been thinking about it for quite a few days. Yeah, so that was more or less my spoiler-free review. I know it's kind of vague. It's just really hard to talk about the book without getting into like the details. So please, I implore you, if you haven't read the book, you should read the book. Also, it's not a very long book. It's like 200-ish pages, maybe, give or take. Yeah, and Ishiguro's writing style is really unique. Like he has written these characters in such real heartbreaking ways. It makes you feel like you know them, especially how he like unfolds the narrative slowly. It's like you start reading the book and then this information comes at you really slowly, and by the time you've gotten to the end of it, you don't realize how much you care for these characters because the rolling of the like ball has been so slow that by the time it hits you, you don't even realize that you've been hit. So that's kind of what I felt like at the end of the novel. I had a very like physical reaction to the book, which I don't usually. I was just very involved in the story and the emotions that he talked about. So yeah, again, read the book if you haven't, and then come back and watch the full video. So that was my spoiler-free section. I'm about to dive into spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, now is your time to back out. I'll wait.
Pardon me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Pardon me. Beg your pardon. Pardon me. Excuse me.
Are you still here? You should leave if you haven't read the book. Okay. So let's get into it. I have here some notes that I want to read from and refer to. So before we get into some of the themes, I want to delve into the themes more deeply in the novel. But before we get into that, there are some detailed plot points that I want to talk about. Like, so it is sort of hinted at strongly, not really confirmed, but in the way that authors do, where they're like, we want you to think about it in this way. It really is that, but they don't really give you a confirmation. Anyhow, so Etsuko is living in England in this big house all by herself. She has left behind her first husband, who was Japanese, and she came to England with her 7-year-old daughter, Keiko. And in the present day, the British husband that she married has died. So has her daughter. Her only living daughter is Nikki, who doesn't stay with her and stays in London. And so it's interesting because as we go through the themes, some of the similarities between Etsuko and Sachiko are really interesting, like in a way that makes you think that Sachiko's not even real, maybe. Like she might be a figment of Etsuko's imagination, or she's like a physical manifestation of the guilt that Etsuko carried with her for bringing Keiko to this country. And because of that, Keiko like died, possibly. We don't know all the reasons, but either way, the similarities that Sachiko and Etsuko have are they're really intensely similar. They're both mothers. They both have young daughters who are reclusive and asocial. And they both are moving to Western countries. Like in the story, Sachiko's about to leave Japan to go live in the US because she doesn't want to be a part of Japanese culture anymore. She thinks that women don't have rights. And Etsuko also leaves the country for reasons that we'll delve into. So that's why I think that possibly Sachiko is in fact a figment of Etsuko's imagination. We'll dive into like specific instances where Ishiguro kind of confirms that, but those are the major plot points that are obviously spoilers for for the themes that I'm about to jump into. So I'll try to keep some of the themes crisp, but with this book, it's like the more you talk about it, the more you find that there is to unveil, which is a really cool thing actually to have in a novel. So let's just get right into it. I have heard that Ishiguro is famous for using the unreliable narrator. I haven't read too many of his books. I've only read Never Let Me Go, and this is the second one, Uphill View of Hills. And Etsuko's memory seems to be fading. She mentions a few times that this has happened. And I just want to read a quote to you which I'll also put up on screen. Memory, I realize, can be an unreliable thing. Often it is heavily colored by the circumstances in which one remembers, and no doubt this applies to certain of the recollections I have gathered here. So this happens pretty like early on in the novel when she's talking about her memory, and there's a few more times where she like kind of nods to this. So it's obviously like a way that Ishiguro is letting us know that, hey, this is what she's recalling, but it may or may not be real. We don't know. We shall see. And as I said before, as we learn more about the friendship that Etsuko has with Sachiko, the parallels seem to keep growing. And it makes you wonder if Etsuko's memory is betraying her in some way, or if she has just blocked out certain traumatic memories, and this is the only way that she can explain it to other people, specifically to Nikki. So memory and the unreliable narrator was one of the first things I noticed. Secondly, was the theme of guilt. Etsuko is a mother who has lost her child. She wasn't able to improve Keiko's life in England, and neither was she able to do much for her in Japan. So Etsuko wanted to break free from the traditions of Japanese culture and her Japanese husband, but Keiko's trauma never healed. It is sort of hinted that like Keiko saw a lot of war related trauma in Tokyo that she never really recovered from. She saw specifically images of like a woman drowning her baby, possibly, and so she never was able to process any of that trauma or talk about it. And every time that it's sort of hinted that she's going through something, she's like neglected. So yeah. Keiko's trauma caused her to be withdrawn. Etsuko talks about how she never left her room when she was in England. She was sort of trapped in her room herself. Like at first, I think she used to come out for meals and things like that, but then she stopped fully. She ate in her room. She would only open the door to like leave her laundry for her mom. And so yeah, Keiko went from being trapped in one place, Japan, to being trapped in another place, and she just never healed from any of those instances. And the guilt is also evident in how Etsuko questions Sachiko throughout the novel, especially regarding Mariko. So Mariko is Sachiko's daughter. We don't know whether Mariko is real or a figment of Etsuko's imagination, or if she's just supposed to be the representation of Keiko at that age. Yeah. So, and also the existence of Sachiko herself is an emblem of Etsuko's guilt regarding the decisions that she's made and the consequences that followed from those decisions. Because at sort of one point in the novel, Mariko doesn't want to go to America. She's fought her mom on it. The only thing that Mariko cares about are these kittens because they have life, and that's the only thing she talks about throughout the novel. When people ask her questions, she snubs them. The only thing she cares about are these kittens. And so she finally sort of like is placated when Sachiko tells Mariko that sure, okay, we're gonna take your kittens with us and go back to like our uncle's house, which is a lie. Sachiko wants to go to the US. She just hasn't told Mariko that yet. She's just placating her. And Mariko is happy for a while that the kittens are going to be able to come with her, but then she realizes that things are not going the way that her mom promised they would. And Etsuko tries to intervene to like calm the situation down. And Etsuko tells her that if you're not happy, we'll come back. And there is a switch in the tone of the novel at this point where Etsuko's talking to Mariko, who's supposed to be like another woman's daughter, but it's really evident in the way that she's saying it that it's probably the same conversation that she had with Keiko, where she promised her, if we're not happy in England, we can come back. But despite Keiko being unhappy, they never came back. So that also is evidence of her guilt. Now, the other theme that is pretty heavily touched upon is war. The losses that both the characters and the country has gone through colors the book almost in its full entirety. Ogata's son is Etsuko's father-in-law. He comes to live with them for like a brief, well, not live with them. He comes to visit them for like a brief period. And he's kind of the spokesperson for the older generation and their points of view at the time, specifically when Japan was going into war and was pushing for things to happen that was good for the nation, but not necessarily good for the people. It's like the older generation didn't really do anything to stop it. They really believed in loyalty and what the nation wanted and pushed for all these things to happen. And then obviously the war came and Nagasaki and Hiroshima were bombed. And we see mentions of those throughout the book. But yeah, so Ogata-san comes and he's really against Western culture. He's really against the ideals that people are beginning to adopt of Western culture, and they're like beginning to forget Japan. Specifically, an article is written by Ogata-san's son, who's Etsuko's husband. His friend has written this article talking about like basically blaming the older generation for the war that's occurred, and it's evident how upset Ogata-san is by all this. He thinks it's wrong. He thinks that Jiro is Etsuko's husband. So he tells his son Jiro that like you should call your friend over because I want to have a talk with him. I want to explain this article. And he's pretty demanding in asking his son to do this. But his son sort of like listens to what he's saying, but doesn't really comment on anything, which is obviously like a way of his son saying that I don't agree with what you did, and I don't want to go out there and like support the fact that I'm against this. Yeah, so nothing really happens with that article. There's like a Ogata-san eventually like visits the friend and they have this conversation about it, and Ogata's really upset, but the friend doesn't do anything to refute the article. He like kind of has an open argument with him about it, and basically Ogata's like telling him that the newer generation has forgotten Japan. They've forgotten loyalty. They've forgotten everything that Japan stands for. Everybody's becoming selfish and only caring about themselves and like forgetting the nation. And that's all that happens. The article's never refuted. It's never taken down. Ogata-san just kind of leaves, and it's just sort of left in that way. But we see the fact that this influence is in the country because of how much like Etsuko herself wants to leave Japan. She wants to leave Japan behind. And she doesn't want to be involved in the culture. She thinks that like she should have more rights. She should be allowed to do whatever she wants to do, and not be held back by her husband. So that leads us directly into the next theme, which is basically moving forward. There's almost an obsessive need that Etsuko has to keep moving forward and to forget about the war, to forget about her past and everything that's happened. It's mentioned in the novel that like when the bomb hit Nagasaki, her family died. Her family was wiped out. I think she was the only one who survived. Ogata-san took her into his home and she lived with them for a while, and it's insinuated that that's how she got married to Ogata-san's son. Now, we don't know if that was like a good marriage or a bad marriage. We know a little bit about her husband, just that he was kind of oppressive and like a typical patriarch at the time, I guess. So that's all we know about him, and he doesn't seem to support things that Etsuko's interested in. She mentions a couple times that she like used to play the violin and she used to really enjoy it, but her husband wasn't a fan of that, so he like ordered her to stop playing music, which is interesting because Sachiko mentions that she used to learn English, but then her husband was against her knowing so much English, possibly just like being better at him than this and stuff. And so he orders her to stop learning English and throws out her textbooks. So again, lots of parallels between them. Etsuko moves on from her Japanese husband to a British husband, another example of her like shifting from one culture to the other. There's an instance in the book where Etsuko's friend, Mrs. Fujiwara, she runs a noodle shop. She's lost her entire family to the war. She only has one living son who we'll sort of get to. So Mrs. Fujiwara runs a noodle shop, and Etsuko is visiting her, and then they have this conversation, and Mrs. Fujiwara tells Etsuko that she looks really exhausted and miserable recently, and like what's going on, because in the novel, in the past, Etsuko is supposed to be pregnant with Keiko at the time. And Etsuko is genuinely surprised to hear that she looks miserable because she has this need to look forward so much that she's forgotten about the hardships that she's going through because she's so insistent on wanting to look ahead and on wanting to move on. In chapter 7, the phrase looking forward shows up 11 times. So that should that should tell you something. Also, the name of the book, A Pale View of Hills, also appears in that same looking forward aspect. There's a lot of scenes where people are gazing outside of the window. So Etsuko is gazing outside of her apartment window and she sees a pale view of hills, and she says it brings her a rare sense of relief from the emptiness of those long afternoons I spent in that apartment, which is really interesting because like gazing outside is her only sense of relief. It's the only thing that gives her joy and probably helps her forget the hardships that she's going through. And interestingly enough, the hills that she can see from her apartment window are the hills of Inasa, which is the last place that she remembers Keiko being happy. There's a scene where Sachiko and Mariko and Etsuko go on to this to these hills. There's like a cable car ride. You can go up to the mountain and things like that. And at the time in the novel, it seems like okay, it's Sachiko and Mariko and Etsuko going together. But then later at the end of the novel, Etsuko says that that's the last place she remembers Keiko ever being really happy. So another nod to the fact that Sachiko and Mariko are not real, just figments of her imagination, people that she's like sort of projected her guilt and actions on. So yeah, that. And speaking of Sachiko and Mariko, it's just a lot of like rhyming type names. It's hard to remember them. Anyway, the appearance of ghosts is another thing that I want to talk about. So the appearance of ghosts and supernatural, like I said before, is pretty common, especially after a tragedy. So the principal book, the principal ghost in the book is Keiko, whose life hangs over the entire novel, especially in scenes where Etsuko's talking to Nikki in their house and Nikki complains of not being able to sleep opposite Keiko's room because she just feels uncomfortable. She can't sleep. She has nightmares. Etsuko also comments on the fact that she hasn't been able to go back in Keiko's room much because she's like her spirit is still there. She spent so much time in that room that it's just embedded in there. Yeah. So Keiko hanged herself in her house in Manchester. Keiko, like, we don't know at what age she died. It's just that she moved out from her parents' home. She moved to Manchester. She was living in a house there and she hanged herself there. So her body wasn't found for several days because she was obviously a recluse. So Etsuko keeps dwelling on this fact, and this comes up several times in the novel, that since this is the last memory that she has of Keiko, really, of like that caretaker finding Keiko's body and then obviously contacting Etsuko and telling her about it. But despite the fact that it's this horrific memory, especially for a mother, she keeps dwelling on it because it's all that she has left of Keiko. And then she finds a way to sort of like make her peace with it. And there's this quote where she says, "It is possible to develop an intimacy with the most disturbing of things." And I think that kind of sums up a lot of things that go on in the novel. It's like all these disturbing things have happened throughout Etsuko's life. She wasn't happy in Japan. She wasn't really happy in England. We don't know anything about her British husband. The only thing that she mentions is that he like has written an article about Japan, but he doesn't understand anything of the East. And that's all that we know of him. So she wasn't happy in Japan. She wasn't happy in England. Her daughter has passed away. Her other daughter, whom she has left, has now left her physically and is living in London. The modern woman whom Etsuko wanted to be, but Nikki has actually become. So she experiences this intense wave of loneliness. And it doesn't seem like she has very many friends either. So it's like Etsuko's life has kind of just been depressing throughout, and yet she's found a way to become intimate with it because that's all that she has. So, the last thing I wanted to mention was the theme of emigration, which is kind of related to the fact of war and of moving forward. You emigrate because things are, well, some people have emigrated because things are bad, or they can't live in that country anymore, or it's not feasible, or they want to, you know, have a better life. So they move to a different country because things could be better. If not for them, then for their kids, which is kind of the whole theme, the whole reason that I think Etsuko wanted to do this, or at least that's what she tells herself, is that she's doing it for Keiko, to give Keiko a better life so she doesn't have to live in trauma anymore. It doesn't pan out that way, but that's what she tells herself. In the novel, Ishiguro names one of the characters after himself. So Mrs. Fujiwara's son, the only one that she has left alive, his name is Kazuo, which I found interesting that Ishiguro put his own name in this book, because obviously the theme of emigration is really important to him. He is Japanese, but moved to England himself when he was really young, when he was 5 years old. He has a Japanese name, but he writes in English, and he's probably more British than he is Japanese. So this theme clearly matters a lot to him. It's kind of like being stuck in a liminal space where you don't really belong to one place, but you don't really belong to another place, and you just have this third place of your own, which is a theme that I myself understand really deeply. I grew up in China. I'm obviously not Chinese, but I spent my almost entire childhood and teenage years, yeah, in China, and I grew up there. And I went to an American school, so I grew up with like three of these cultures sort of ingrained in me, like the Chinese country, me being Indian by heritage, and yeah, just having American culture embedded in my life. So this theme of being stuck in a liminal space can can be seen through this novel, of not being able to really I don't, well, not finding happiness, but not being able to have everything work out maybe the way that you wanted it to, especially for Etsuko. So yeah, those were the themes evident throughout the book, at least the ones that I caught, and I wanted to have it talk about it in a more like crisp manner. I'm sure there's way more that you could delve into and talk about and think about, because despite this novel being so short, there's so much richness and depth to it that it's really easy to study, really interesting to talk about. And I'm really thankful that I was able to read this book. The more I studied this book, the more I was in awe of Ishiguro and his writing style, and I definitely want to read more of his books. I didn't love Never Let Me Go as much as I loved A Pale View of Hills. Um, but yeah, let me know what Ishiguro novels you have read and you have enjoyed. Have you read A Pale View of Hills? If you have, please tell me what your rating was and how you felt about it. Overall, I rated this book a 4 out of 5, because there were qualms that I had specifically with the ending, and there were still some unanswered questions, like why Etsuko left her Japanese husband, and Ishiguro didn't really answer the question of whether or not Sachiko and Mariko were real people or not. I mean, it's kind of evident that they're not, but it's nicer when you have closure from the author himself telling you that yes, it's not, they're not real people. So that wasn't really there. But I loved the book otherwise. It stayed with me for a really long time, and I think it's going to stay with me even longer. But talking about it helps, and like sharing your thoughts and ideas with other people is really cool. And having other people respond and say that, hey, I felt this way too, or hey, I also read the book and really loved it. It helps. So if you've read the book, please let me know how you felt about it. If you've watched till the end, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you have a really good week, and happy reading.